I want to welcome you back to the Manage to Win podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com, where you can take your strongest habits and make them superpowers. And you do this typically in teams. We do have individuals, but mostly these are companies that need the soft skills of their people to be stronger. So they are going after some weaknesses, but we also encourage you to work on those strengths and really make it so you can work effectively together and give clients an excellent experience every time they work with your organization. Today's episode is with David Saltzman. He's the founder, CEO at the Saltzman Group, also an author, speaker, podcast host. He's a certified StoryBrand guide. Now, and that's what we talk about. You really have the story nailed down for your company. Are you really helping people understand what you can do for them versus just talking about yourself or talking about your services? Great conversation, good tips. Let's dive in. David, I am really excited to have you on the show because you're a story brand and story expert. So where do you want to start? I mean, do we start with a story or do you start with your journey? Where do we go?
Well, I think a little bit of background is probably in order. A little bit. We won't get too ponderous about it. But I've been doing marketing for years and years and years. I've been a professional author now for almost 35 years. And I got the book. I got Building a Story Brand by Don Miller, which new to me at the time, about 3.5, 4 years ago. And I went, aha, this is what I need to help clients do better work. And my initial thought was, I'm the marketing guy. I can do this for myself. And after the third attempt, I dialed up Don's offices in Nashville and said, hey, can I come down and study with you? Because there's more to this than meets the eye. And so I became a certified story brand guide. And there is indeed a lot more of it than meets the eye. But that was my starting point with StoryBrand, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Well, that's great. I think it's a challenge for businesses. I mean, we have our business that's done okay, but hasn't, rocked anything. And one of the things that we've challenged with is with our Habitly brand, where we have soft skills training and really getting the story right on that and how we tell it. And, we're making some progress, but we're not there. Where do people get stuck and then they come to you and then build out this story? And how does that differ from what you did in the past? I mean, as you said, you've been in marketing for quite some time.
Well, I think it honed a lot of things and brought a lot of things into focus. And the first place where salespeople get stuck is when they make the story about themselves or about their product, because it really doesn't matter to your client. I was talking to a friend who wanted me to do some work for him about 1.5 years ago. And I was booked up, didn't have any openings. And he said, well, we got a half an hour scheduled for the call. Where would you start? And I said, well, I'd probably start with your website. He said, okay, tell me about our website. I said, it sucks. There was a long pause. And he said, can you tell me what part of it? And I said, nope. He said, well, how can you tell me it sucks if you can't tell me what part? I said, because I've never looked at your website, but I can tell you what's on it. And I proceeded to list off for him all the things that were on it. He said, on the first page of your website, there's probably some really pretty image that is incomprehensible to anybody, doesn't speak to what you do. You talk about your firm, you talk about your employees, you talk about the products you sell, you talk about how the products that you sell work, you talk about how long you've been in business. And he said, well, we're really proud of all that stuff. I said, and you should be, but it doesn't belong on your website because nobody cares about that crap except you. If that's really important to you, build a corporate brochure, send it to your prospect a week before your meeting with a note that says, want to make sure we make next week's meeting all about you, but thought you'd like to learn a little bit about us. How many of us, David, have seen these gorgeous websites where you look at it and your eye is immediately caught and you go, gee, I wonder what the hell they do. And that's where people get stuck, is they make the story about themselves and not about their prospect's problem.
Yeah, and I think that even when they get into the problem or they think they're getting into the problem, they start talking about their services.
Right. And no one cares about that. It's the old saw about if someone asks you what time it is, don't tell them how to build a watch because they don't care. They just want to know what time it is.
Yeah.
And the StoryBrand discipline is really ancient storytelling theory. It's been around for years and years and years. I mean, look, we were telling stories 38,000 years ago by making pictures on caves in France. And nothing's changed. I mean, one might argue that we have emojis now and we've come full circle. We just do it electronically. But the StoryBrand outline starts with who is the main character in the story, and that's always the client. And we talk about, okay, well, what are the client's needs? And the second place where most people get stuck is that they think that their client's need is about a product, and it almost never is. So where we take clients is we say, okay, you have a main character who's got a need, but it's 3 parts, and they're increasing depths of psychological complexity. External, what they tell their golfing buddies. Internal, what they might say to themselves, and then philosophical, the broader picture. Like, it just shouldn't be so hard to do X, Y, Z, whatever their problem is. And the reason that we do that is because decisions that human beings make are not made with the prefrontal cortex. We think they are. That's the reasoning part of our brains. Decisions are all made emotionally. They're made in the amygdala. That's where that old fight or flight piece of our brain, some people call it the lizard brain, that's still there. And then we have gotten really adept at rationalizing those decisions with our prefrontal cortex. So the second mistake is that when somebody's looking to solve a problem for a client, they look at step 1 and they solve for step 1. And that doesn't ever work because it doesn't tell you the whole story about what the client really wants to achieve. And it doesn't give you the insight to strike that psychological chord, that emotional chord with the client. The third mistake that they make is they go in like they're the main character, and they're not. They're the guide. So think you should be Yoda, not Luke Skywalker. And from there, it's a lot easier. But those are the 3 places where most folks who are trying to construct a marketing message that resonates, that's clear, that's concise, that doesn't confuse clients and prospects, that's where they stumble.
Can you give me an example? So what does that look like? Maybe before and after. Before client X had this going on, but then this is what it got changed to. Because I love what you're saying, but I'm trying to piece it together. Because I've also heard Don Miller, and I think he's awesome.
Don is amazing. Don's amazing. He's built an amazing organization, and he's become a good personal friend, and his organization's people are terrific. But here's an example. You and I have a little bit of gray hair, and so maybe we are in the time of our life when we're either near or thinking about Medicare. And so I was working with an insurance agent whose practice was all Medicare. And I looked on their website and their messaging and their other collaterals, which is the first thing we do when we take a client, is we do an assessment of all of the materials and all the messaging that they're currently doing. And it talked about this kind of Medicare plan and that kind of Medicare plan, and you shouldn't get this and you should get that. It sounded kind of like those commercials with Joe Namath and some other folks who are doing commercials now. And we talked about it, and I said, is that really why your clients seek you out? Because you have all of these different plans? And he said no. And as we got to talking, it came out that the single biggest thing that his clients were worried about was choosing the wrong plan. And so we repositioned his practice so that he became the guy who not only helped people find the right plan for them, but kept them from making a mistake. Because as we know psychologically, fear of loss is a much greater motivator than desire for gain. And that turned his practice around.
Well, that's interesting because then it's help me find the right plan, not make a mistake. So I'm 65, so I had to go through that, about a year ago. What do I want to do? Where do I go? Blah, blah, blah. So what, for me, it didn't seem that complicated, but for some people, I can see how it would be.
Well, they're afraid of, what happens if I choose the wrong thing and all of a sudden I can't get medical care and blah, blah. Now, that almost never happens. But I mean, lots of people choose the wrong plan, but everybody always gets the medical care that they need one way or the other. But that's the fear. And so when you talk about creating a message that resonates psychologically with the client that you want, that's where you go. You don't scare them, but you understand that's what's motivating them. And you say, hey, I can solve that problem.
So as the guide, are you connecting with a person's fears typically?
No, we're connecting with their desires. Sometimes that's fear. Sometimes it's not. Generally, we look at those three items, that internal, external, and philosophical need, and we say, hey, we're the guide, we have empathy and authority, and here's a quick plan that will get you what you want. And then we give them a call to action, and we show them what the future looks like if they undertake the plan, and we show them what the future looks like if they don't undertake the plan.
It's interesting. Sorry, my mind's just kind of spinning. So the guide concept. So what pieces of the puzzle do you help with as an organization? You mentioned website, but what pieces do you help with them craft?
Everything from soup to nuts. It starts with, as I mentioned, surveying all of the materials and the messaging they're currently using. Mm-hmm. And then we the first step we do is we take that 7-part journey that I've just talked to you about. A client who has a problem meets a guide who gives them a solution, a quick plan, a call to action, sometimes 2 calls to action, and shows them what the future will look like, good or bad. That typically takes an awful lot of work with a client. And then we take that and squish it down. We distill it down into a narrative, which can actually just be read out, and that takes a couple of pages. And then we distill it even further to what is really the key, and that's the one-liner. The one-liner is kind of the essence of the message that you want to give every single time. It's your North Star. It's your keystone. And from there, we begin to develop other marketing materials. When we do websites, we do a website, and we do kind of a downloadable PDF so that I can harvest email addresses, or my client can harvest email addresses and whatnot, and continue to market to folks. And the 2 calls to action, as I mentioned, one is, it's kind of like dating. One is, yeah, let's go on a date right now. Call me, let's make an appointment. The other is, I want to learn more. I might be interested, but I want to learn more. So we give them those 2 pathways. And what we learned when we started the practice, David, was really fascinating, because we were kind of selling that package. And we'd get to the end of that work, and more often than not, a client would say, well, but wait, you can't go. I need somebody to help me write copy, and I need somebody to help me with my LinkedIn stuff, and I need somebody to help me build a presentation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've become fractional CMOs for a number of organizations where they're not big enough to afford the kind of tab for a full-time chief marketing operations or officer rather, but where they actually need that kind of work.
Yeah. And how long does this process take?
It depends on how much time the client wants to put into it, but in terms of hours, the initial survey is usually pretty quick. Going through those 7 steps, generally because I give the client homework along the way, because I want them to think through some of the process rather than my telling them, because that helps it then become more organic on the back end. That's generally 8 to 10 hours worth of work with a client. And then the rest of it just depends on, what the client's needs are. Some clients don't want a website, don't need a website, but they need other things. They need deliverables, or they need collateral, or they need social media stuff.
But the process of developing the story sounds like it doesn't have to take that long. It can get done in 2 weeks to 4 weeks.
Generally, the engagement is 2 to 4 weeks. Exactly. More often than not, 4 weeks, because the folks I work with are busy running their businesses and they have to carve out little chunks of time. But if somebody said to me, hey, I've got nothing else to do next week, can we knock it off in a week? The answer is, if I have the time and you have the time, sure.
Yeah. So then you're doing you're doing 4 weeks, let's say that. And then when you're building on top of that for the website, and I know you believe less is more, so the website's not going to get carried away with 47 different links to pages. How long does that typically take? I mean, and that's tough probably to give a ballpark, but just to kind of give an idea if somebody's thinking, we need an upgrade.
Well, this gone through the StoryBrand process because one-liner, and you've just it down to its very and build. I mean, I'm a writer, so it's easy for me to write, but it's relatively quick once you've got that done to go out and create other materials. So from there, given no interruptions, I could wireframe a website in 2 days.
Yeah. So I'm curious, can you give me some other examples, maybe some other industries? You ever worked with, well, obviously we have a lot of people in the technology business. They provide outsourced IT services, but ever done a technology company that just wasn't telling their story right?
Yeah, we actually built a completely new division for a technology company. They provide cloud services, and as you know, the cloud service universe is jumbos. You get the AWSs and all of those cats, but nobody was marketing to small businesses. And America, as you and your audience know, is mostly small businesses. It's mostly businesses with fewer than 50 employees. And so they built an entirely new company, and we built it around the new normal. We built it around the hybrid workplace. Because if your employees weren't coming into the office anymore, and we've had this now for almost 3 years, it only seems like forever. But if your employees aren't coming into the office, your IT folks aren't either. And who's running that infrastructure? And so we played off of all of those pluses that you had where you didn't need to go traditional, and it wasn't actually good for you or for your remote employees to be traditional. And one of the things that we talked about was, if the talent you need is in Austria and you're in Peoria, you can hire them and you can get them up and running in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So it's a question of understanding the story that the client needs to tell and what the needs are. But yeah, we've done all kinds of different industries. It's fun because it applies to everybody, and yet it's similar in so many ways from client to client to client, even though each client is so different. I worked with a Tony Robbins coach who was building his own coaching business. He happened to be in Austria, and we helped him build that out. It's just been fascinating to see how this all applies to everybody. Everybody's got a story. Everybody wants to tell the story. And as a business person, if you tell the story effectively, you're successful. Look, Steve Jobs said the most important person is the storyteller. And he was right, even amidst all the technology and whatnot. Think about that for a minute. Think about what Apple sells. Apple sells the same stuff that everybody else and every other brand sells. Why are there people whose offices, like mine, are outfitted only with Apple stuff? I buy it at a premium. I mean, it's nice stuff, but it's still more expensive than I can get the similar stuff out, on Amazon. I buy it because I'm not buying gear. I'm buying a story that satisfies my need. And they understood that, and that's how they market. And that's how a lot of brands, especially premium brands, have been very effective in marketing. They touch that emotional chord. When you get an Apple computer, the box is more gorgeous than any piece of artwork hanging on your wall. It's just the experience. That's that emotional chord that they've learned how to touch that other folks haven't.
Yeah, and it's interesting, your piece in the puzzle, because Apple also, and Jobs really led the change, creates a high quality product and did some things like the Genius Bar that were unique for high touch, and to say that they were there for you type of thing, that were very different. And then when you add in the story piece, like you're saying, then it all comes together. Because, I guess the opposite, where you might have the story, but actually you haven't fixed your operations or the quality of your services, would really blow up in your face. I mean, that goes without saying.
I would suggest to you that, and I love the example, I would suggest to you that I think the Genius Bar was part of their story. Look, again, you and I are of a vintage where we kind of remember when PCs first started taking over the universe. I remember when I got my first PC, the first thing I did was take it apart. And then I learned how to code in DOS. It's really weird to say code in DOS because they're really two different things. But I learned how to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Fast forward through my life cycle. What do I want? I just want this stuff to work. I don't want to have the headache of dealing with it. So if Apple understood that that was their client, then they also understood that they needed to create an experience for that client when they had a problem that didn't require them to get under the hood and get their fingernails dirty.
Yeah.
They could just walk in, see some smart 20-year-old, and the problem would get fixed. Yeah. So, I mean, they were really brilliant, and they had the entire package, and I think Jobs did it intuitively. But, you know, a leader like Steve Jobs comes along once in a generation, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're working with these companies, what are the things that they're typically blind to, besides the fact that they think it's all about them and all about their services? Even if they're humble, they think that's what they need to be talking about. Separate of that, where are the other blind spots?
I think, as we said, the first blind spot is in really understanding who your client is and what their needs are. And that's true. And when you get past that, it's about being concise. Don says all the time, if you confuse, you'll lose. The human brain is only programmed to do two things: survive and thrive. If you make things difficult in your messaging, even if you've got the right message, if you make things difficult in your messaging, you're going to lose. Because, was it Forrester says now it's 13 seconds that you have if you're looking for something on the web. And if you can't find it in 13 seconds, we're gone. That's not good news, because a couple of years ago, it was 17 seconds. Yeah. So the second mistake that I think a lot of folks make, even if they think they have the message right, is that they suffer from what we know as the curse of knowledge. That's what psychologists call it. We understand all this really cool stuff, so we're going to tell you about it.
How do you handle the part where you're saying, we're going to show you, what's going to happen if you buy our service or whatever, you sign up. We're also going to show what happens if you don't. How do you do that negative side in a way that doesn't offend people, but helps alert them that they should have some healthy fear if they make a mistake?
The reason it doesn't offend people is because we build it based on their status quo. That's a little inside secret. But what that "if you don't do this" looks like is kind of what their world looks like today, and why they have the problem that they have. So it's not offensive,
give me an
but it is sometimes eye-opening.
Give me an example in any industry. Yeah.
Sure. If I'm selling rubber baby buggy bumpers and I got a lot of competition and a lot of noise in the marketplace, I understand that my problem is that I'm having trouble differentiating myself from my competitors, because everybody thinks one is as good as the other, but I build the best one. So when we talk about, okay, here's the plan, here's the story, here's what happens if you do take the plan and run with it. If you don't take the plan with it, you're in a marketplace that's full of noise, that helps you, that is difficult for you to differentiate. So we basically just kind of parrot back the problem that they have. The impression that we want to make, and again, remember, clients, prospects, if you will, don't see this part of it overtly as we do when we're building out the template. But what the message we're trying to give them is, if you do the same old thing, you're going to get the same old thing. Or as somebody said, if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Yeah.
And I don't think people find it offensive. I just think sometimes their eyelids kind of bang open and go, oh crap, that's me today.
Yeah. And the rubber baby buggy bumpers dates us both.
Well, it does, but yeah, right now they're neoprene, but yeah,
they're whatever
they make rubber baby buggy bumpers out of now.
Yeah. So it's very interesting, and now I want to go back to your comment about be Yoda, not Luke Skywalker. So be the guide, but talk to me a little bit more about that, because when I think of Yoda, it's like there is no try, there's only do. But I know he was guiding Skywalker, but when we think of how we're explaining what we're doing to somebody else, how do we be more Yoda-like?
Well, let me give you a different example, and maybe that'll be a little bit clearer. And part of the reason that these commercials that I'm going to talk about resonate is because they hit that psychological trigger point. Everybody's seen the Allstate commercials with that guy Mayhem, where the nice person is driving their car and all of a sudden there's this guy in a black suit with a bandage on his face, and he's over there breakdancing and doing something crazy, and then they crash their car, and Dennis Haysbert comes on and says, don't be the victim of mayhem. Take an all-state policy, and we're going to send you to our website, and you can get a quote, and all of those pieces. You don't want to be mayhem. You want to be the person who solves the problem for them. So that's where you need to be. You want to be Dennis Haysbert. You don't want to be the mayhem guy. And too often, because we deliver messages that confuse and that are convoluted and that don't say to the client, I understand your problem. I've solved it before. I can help you solve it. Follow me. We lose them.
We lose them when we tell them that I've solved it before and follow me?
No, if we don't tell them that, we lose them.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got it. And that's that commercial. And that's every novel you've ever read. Look, we've all read books. Sometimes you pick up a book, you get 5 or 10 pages into it, and you put it down and you go, not for me, maybe I'll pick it up later.
Yeah.
Other times you pick up a book and all of a sudden it's 2 a.m. and you're trying to finish before your eyes close. What's the difference? The difference is that the author has drawn you in. He's made it your story. He's made you an integral part of the story. It's just story theory. It's the same thing. It hasn't changed in thousands of years.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, what's like your favorite client that you've ever worked on? What happened there?
I think my favorite client, I hope all the other clients aren't listening, but I think my favorite client is probably the fellow that I mentioned that I work with in Austria. His name is Ronnie. And Ronnie was an interesting cat because he was Austrian, but he had spent 2 years going to high school in New Hampshire. So he understood the mentality on this side of the pond. He understood over there. He had all this great background working with Tony Robbins. So he had the presence and whatnot. He just wanted, and he was a great MC. He happens to be the voice, the stadium voice for the Austrian national soccer team. But he was building a consulting practice, and he couldn't quite get that aligned so that it would draw clients in. And not only was it something that we were able to help him with, but the reason he's been my favorite client to work with so far is because working with somebody who's not American, especially somebody who's Germanic, they think very differently. And it was a really interesting experience for me to take somebody who thinks very differently through the process. And I think I learned as much as Ronnie did. Also, since he's done a whole bunch of TV and we were just starting to do video for our podcasts, he gave me an awful lot of camera technique tips. So we kind of traded back and forth. And he's a friend to this day. We chat every now and again.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, if a member of our audience wants to chat with you, David, where do they learn more?
There's a couple of ways to get in touch with me. You can email me directly at david@the-Saltzman Group, SALTZMAN Group.com. You can go to the website, which is obviously the Saltzman Group. There's a white paper for download there, or just for folks who are listening to the podcast, if you go to the Saltzman Group /download, there's a special piece with 8 secrets about how to structure your story, and you can download that there as well.
Fabulous. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I love what you're talking about. It's tempting to talk to you about working with you ourselves. So, really appreciate your tips today.
David, thank you so much for the opportunity and look forward to chatting with you more.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you liked the episode with David, please subscribe, give us a comment or a rating. We'd love your feedback. And by the way, send this podcast to others. David gave some great advice today. And don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com, where you can really take your habits to the next level, your behaviors, those soft skills that you were never taught or somewhat taught, really grow them, really build them, and you'll see your career take off and you'll enjoy your work more and how you're living life. And lastly, again, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. More great guests coming with more insights for you to become the best that you can be. Bye for now.